On the morning of March 4th, 2024, my daughter sat across from me at my own kitchen table, the one her father built with his hands in 1987, and told me I was becoming a burden. She didn't say it that way, of course. She never does. She said, "Mom, we just think this house is too much for one person at your age. We've been doing some research, and there are some really lovely retirement communities in Barrie. Private rooms, organized activities, people your own age." People your own age? Like 63 was ancient. Like I should be grateful someone was still willing to think about me at all. I looked at her. My daughter, Sylvie, who I had pushed through 26 hours of labor, who I had driven to every ballet lesson and volleyball practice from 1994 to 2010, who I had helped move 3 times in 4 years. And I said, very calmly, "I'll think about it." 3 months later, I was sitting on the terrace of a stone cottage in the Algarve, Portugal, drinking a glass of vinho verde, watching the Atlantic catch fire in the sunset. My phone was on the table beside me. Sylvie had called 11 times that week. I let everyone go to voicemail. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Louise Gagnon Harte. I'm 63 years old. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, spent 31 years working as a registered nurse at Health Sciences North, and for the last 7 years, I have lived alone in the house my late husband Frank and I bought in 1986 for $114,000. That same house, according to the Sudbury real estate listings last October, was worth somewhere around $580,000. I mention that number because Sylvie and her husband knew it too. Frank died in February 2017 from a second heart attack. He was 61 years old. The first one, 5 years earlier, had scared us both badly enough that he quit smoking, started walking every morning, changed everything he ate. He did everything right. And then his heart stopped anyway on a Tuesday morning while he was scraping ice off the car. The paramedics said he was likely gone before he hit the driveway. We had 30 years together. 30 years of Tim Hortons on Sunday mornings and camping at Killarney, and his terrible jokes that I laughed at anyway because they were always just slightly funnier than I wanted to admit. He coached hockey for 22 years. He knew every kid in our neighborhood by name. He was a good man, and I missed him every single day. Sylvie was 30 when her father died. She'd been with her husband, my son-in-law, for 4 years by then. He proposed 6 months after Frank's funeral, which I noted at the time but said nothing about. They married in 2018 in a ceremony I helped pay for without being asked to. I gave them $18,000 toward the venue. That felt like the right thing for a mother to do. For 2 years after Frank's death, Sylvie visited every Sunday. We'd have dinner together, roast chicken or Frank's chili recipe that I kept making because I couldn't stop, and she'd tell me about her job at the insurance brokerage, about the apartment she and her husband were renting in the Donovan. Year 3, visits went to every other week. By 2021, it was birthdays and holidays. In January 2023, she called on a Wednesday evening, which was unusual. "Mom," she said, "we're in a bit of a spot. The landlord sold the building and the new owner wants the units vacant by April. We've been saving, but the market is just insane right now. Would it be okay if we stayed with you for a while? Just until we figure something out." 3 months, maybe 4. I was 62 years old, living in a 3-bedroom house, and the silence had started to feel less like peace and more like pressure. Of course, I said yes. They moved in on February 1st, 2023. Sylvie brought her clothes and her skincare and her expensive coffee machine that took up half the counter. My son-in-law brought what felt like the entire contents of a Costco warehouse, camping gear he never used, weights he never lifted, a gaming setup that went directly into Frank's old study. That room had still had Frank's fishing rods on the wall. They went to the garage. I didn't say anything. The changes started small, the way they always do. Sylvie needed a home office for her remote work, so my sewing room became her workspace. My machine, a Viking I'd saved up for over 3 years and used to make quilts for the hospital auxiliary, went to the basement. Then she needed quiet during her work calls, so I started watching television in my bedroom with the door closed instead of in my own living room. Then my son-in-law began cooking on weekends, which I thought was a kindness until I realized he was also reorganizing my kitchen around his preferences. My cast iron pan, the one Frank bought me at a garage sale in 1991 that I'd seasoned perfectly for 30 years, ended up on the bottom shelf because it was, I was told, a bit heavy to be lifting at your age. I was 62. I was still doing 12-hour shifts on a cardiac unit 18 months before that. They contributed $600 a month toward groceries. The mortgage on my house was paid off. Frank and I finished it in 2009. But property taxes in Sudbury were $4,800 annually. Home insurance ran $1,800. Utilities averaged $350 a month. Maintenance costs on a 1986 house added up. I was covering nearly everything. They were saving, they said, building their down payment. Just a little longer, 14 months passed. I started noticing things. A brochure for a new development in Lively on the kitchen counter, folded open to a page about 3-bedroom townhomes. My son-in-law on a phone call in the backyard, laughing, saying, "Yeah, by summer if everything goes the way we think." Sylvie Googling something on her phone at dinner, tilting the screen slightly away when I glanced over. In September 2023, I was deadheading roses along the back fence. Frank planted them our first summer in the house, and I'd tended them ever since, when I heard Sylvie's voice through the kitchen window. She was on the phone. "I know it seems like a long time," she was saying, "but rent-free is rent-free, right? And she's not going anywhere. Honestly, she'd be better off somewhere smaller. Something more manageable. There's a lovely place in Barrie. My coworker's mom is there. She loves it. Private rooms, activities, everything handled. Mom could have her own space and we could finally have ours." I stood very still between the rose bushes. 14 months, she says, is nothing. My coworker's mom has been at the Barrie place for 2 years, and she says she'd never go back to keeping up a house. I went inside through the front door so she wouldn't hear me come in. I made tea. I sat at Frank's kitchen table, in this house we'd bought together when we were young and broke, and completely certain we build something worth having here, and I made myself a promise. I would not say a word until I had a plan. March 4th, 2024 was a Monday. Sylvie had the day off. She came downstairs at 8 a.m., dressed in what I knew from her Instagram were her Os debut clothes, $90 joggers, a sweater that cost more than my first paycheck. She poured herself a coffee from her machine, sat down across from me, and folded her hands. "Mom, we need to talk about something." My husband of 30 years would have recognized the tone. He used to say Sylvie had inherited my ability to make the word something sound like a verdict. She talked for 10 minutes. It was kind, measured, full of phrases like, "we just think," and "at your stage of life," and "what's really best for you." The house was too big. The winters were hard. I was alone, and that worried them. There was a place in Barrie with wonderful programming. A nurse friend had recommended it highly. They could help me tour it, help me transition, help with the move. And then, the thing is, Mom, we've been pre-approved for a mortgage. We found a place we really love in Lively, but we need to make an offer by the end of the month, and, well, we'd need this address to be available eventually. Not right away, but by June at the latest. June. 4 months. "Is this your house?" I asked. Sylvie blinked. "Well, no, it's yours. Obviously. Just clarifying," I said. My son-in-law appeared in the doorway then, fresh from the gym. He sat down. He used the same voice people use to talk to the very elderly or the very confused. He mentioned the Barrie place had great reviews on Google. He mentioned the winters. He mentioned the stairs. I looked at my daughter, who I had taught to skate on the lake behind this house, who I had sat with through 2 miscarriages in her late 20s. who I had helped during her anxiety relapse in 2020, without ever once making her feel like a burden. And I saw that she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. That was the part that surprised me. She wasn't being cruel, she was being practical. I was something to be managed, and she was being responsible about it. Okay, I said, I'll look into my options. Sylvie reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're being so reasonable about this, Mom. I know change is hard. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed Frank and I had shared for 30 years. My hands were very still in my lap. There was something I hadn't thought about in a long time. Frank had come home from a meeting with our financial advisor in 2019, a year and a half before he died, with a folder and a very particular expression on his face. The expression he got when he'd figured something out he was proud of. "Lo," he'd said, "I want to show you something." I'd been tired, a double shift. "Later," I'd said, and he put the folder in the filing cabinet in the study. And 3 months later he was dead, and I was consumed entirely by grief, and the filing cabinet had stayed closed. I went downstairs to the garage, where the filing cabinet had been moved when my son-in-law set up his gym equipment in the study. The folder was in the third drawer, behind a hanging folder labeled MISC, in Frank's blocky handwriting. Inside was a letter dated October 14th, 2019, on Manulif letterhead. There was also a handwritten note in Frank's hand, on the back of a hardware store receipt the way he always wrote things. "Lou, I didn't want to make a big thing of it because I know you hate worrying about money, but I've been putting things aside for a long time. Not a lot each time, but it adds up. Everything's in here. It's yours. You earned it just as much as I did, probably more. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. All my love, F." I sat down on an overturned storage bin in the garage in my housecoat and read the Manulife documents 3 times. Life insurance policy, $650,000. Beneficiary, Louise Ann Gagnon Hart. I had always assumed the policy was the $50,000 one from his union. We had never discussed it. I had never asked. After he died, I'd been handed so much paperwork that I'd left it to the funeral home coordinator to help me sort through the basics, and then I'd grieved and gone back to work and kept going. There was a Sun Life Group RRSP statement Frank had been contributing since 1994. The balance as of December 2019 was $312.40. There was a TD bank statement for a joint account I didn't recognize. $67,200 accumulated over 11 years from what Frank had annotated as overtime, side jobs, odds and ends. The account was in both our names. There was documentation for a small rental property, a 1-bedroom unit at a building on Spruce Street that Frank had bought in 2011 through something called Hart Property Holdings, with me listed as co-owner. A property management company called Lakeside Rentals had been sending monthly deposits of $1,050 into a business account I'd never accessed. I did the math. Slowly, on the back of the hardware store receipt, the way Frank would have. Life insurance unclaimed, $650,000. RRSP accounts, $312.42.46. TD joint account, $67,200. Rental property value estimated $185,000. Accumulated rental income 84 months at $1,050, $88,200 sitting untouched. Total $1,302,840. Plus the house worth roughly $580,000. I had never once in 7 years asked a single question about any of this. I had been clipping coupons at the Metro on Paris Street and arguing with myself about whether I could afford to replace the hot water heater. I went inside, made coffee, waited until Sylvie and my son-in-law left for the afternoon grocery run, they said. They'd be back by 4. Then I drove to a branch of the TD Bank on Barry Down Road and asked to speak to a financial advisor. The advisor, a woman in her 40s named after a street I recognized from the East End, pulled up the joint account and turned her screen to show me 14 years of deposits and 0 withdrawals. Mrs. Gagnon-Harte, were you aware of this account? I was not, I told her. I explained about Frank's death, the grief, the paperwork. She was professional and very kind. She helped me get access reinstated. She also recommended I speak to an estate lawyer. I had an appointment by the next morning. The lawyer's office was on Durham Street. She was maybe 50, sharp, with the focused energy of someone who'd spent decades untangling other people's messes. I told her everything. The folder, the insurance, the RRSP, the rental unit, the account, 14 months of Sylvie and my son-in-law living rent-free, contributing $600 a month against thousands in expenses. The conversation at the kitchen table. June. The lawyer listened without interrupting. Then she said, I want to be clear about something. This is your house. Your name is on the title. No one can remove you from it. What your daughter is asking you to do is choose to leave, which means you also have the choice to sell. In the current Sudbury market, a fully paid-off house in your neighborhood, 1986 craftsman style, well-maintained, you'd likely see offers around $575,000 to $600,000, possibly higher with the right staging. And if you list, you control the timeline, not your daughter. I looked out the window at Durham Street. March, still gray, still cold, still every winter of my life. I've been thinking about Portugal, I said. It surprised me as I said it. I hadn't known I'd been thinking about it until I did. The lawyer didn't even blink. A lot of Canadians have been making that move. Algarve mainly. Low cost of living, NHR tax status for new residents, mild climate, with your asset base, entirely manageable. I had looked at Portugal once, 2 years after Frank died, in one of those late nights when I couldn't sleep and was searching for somewhere that wasn't here. I'd closed the browser tab because it felt irresponsible to even want something like that. Let's talk about what it would take, I said. I left her office with a list of action items and the particular feeling of someone who has finally remembered that they are a person, not just a function. Over the next 6 weeks, while Sylvie worked from my old sewing room and my son-in-law used Frank's study and our conversations at dinner stayed pleasant and light, I was quietly doing the following. I filed the life insurance claim with Manulife. I was told processing would take 30 to 60 days. I contacted the property manager at Lakeside Rentals, who turned out to be a very organized woman named after a bird. She'd been managing the Spruce Street unit for 9 years and had an excellent relationship with the tenant, who was interested in buying. We listed it privately at $195,000. I transferred the RSP accounts to a new advisor, a woman who specialized in Canadian expat financial planning. She set up a drawdown strategy that would give me approximately $1,800 a month after withholding tax, well within the rules for non-residents. I opened a new checking account at a different branch, in my name only. I called a real estate agent, the top agent in our area, recommended by a former colleague. She walked through the house on a Saturday afternoon while Sylvie and my son-in-law were visiting his parents. Louise, she said, standing in the kitchen, this house is in perfect condition. We could have offers in a week if we list off market. How quickly for a cash buyer? 30 days, she said, maybe less. I joined a Facebook group for Canadian expats in Portugal, posted a single message. Considering the Algarve region, 63-year-old woman would love to connect with anyone who's made this move. Within 48 hours, I had 14 responses. One of them was from a woman from Halifax, 67, a retired teacher who had been in Lagos for 4 years. We video called the following Tuesday for 2 hours. By the end, she'd sent me a contact for a local real estate agent and the name of a property management company that helped expats settle in. 2 weeks before Easter, I went to my doctor for my annual checkup. My blood pressure was slightly elevated. Stress? She asked. I said, temporary. And I meant it. Easter Sunday, April. I cooked the full dinner, maple glazed ham, scalloped potatoes from my mother's recipe, green beans with almonds, rolls from scratch, butter tarts for dessert. My sister came. My closest friend from the hospital, who'd retired the year before, came with her husband. Sylvie and my son-in-law sat at the table I'd set with Frank's grandmother's china. The ham was perfect. The butter tarts were slightly overbaked, but I'd made them that way since 1992, because Frank preferred them firmer, and I still couldn't quite bring myself to change it. At the end of dinner, over coffee, Sylvie brought it up. Have you given any more thought to the Berry place? We were looking at the website again, and they have a unit available in June, which would, I set down my coffee cup. I've made a decision about housing, I said. Everyone looked at me. My sister had her cup halfway to her mouth. My friend from the hospital went still in the particular way of someone who knows something significant is about to happen. Sylvie straightened. Oh, have you looked at other communities? There's actually one in Sudbury, Portugal, I said. A small silence. I'm sorry, Sylvie said. I've rented a cottage in the Algarve, near Lagos. 3-bedroom, stone exterior, terrace looking out to the Atlantic. Available May 15th. I've signed a 1-year lease. My son-in-law put down his fork. Mom, that's Sylvie's voice had gone careful. That's a big decision. Portugal is expensive. The cost of living is considerably lower than Canada, I said, especially on a pension, 3 investment accounts, a life insurance settlement, and the proceeds of a house sale. The silence this time was different. My son-in-law said, House sale. I'm listing this house, I said. The agent has a pre-qualified cash buyer ready. We'd close June 15th. Sylvie's face went through several expressions very quickly. You can't just... This is where I grew up. This is Dad's house. This is my house, I said. Your father built me a table in it. He didn't give me the table. I kept the table. I'm putting it in storage. Where are we supposed to go? I looked at my daughter. I thought about the moment in September, standing between the roses, hearing her voice through the window. She'd be better off somewhere smaller, something more manageable. Find your own place, I said. You have until June 14th. My friend from the hospital made a sound that was not quite a laugh and quickly turned it into a cough. Sylvie pushed back her chair. You're being completely unreasonable. You're 63. Moving to a foreign country alone? My flight leaves May 10th, I said. Air Canada, direct to Lisbon, connecting to Faro. I've already checked in online. That last part was not true yet, but it would be. The Manulife check arrived on April 28th. $650,000, made out to Louise Ann Gagnon Hart. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot on Barry Down Road for quite a long time, holding it. Frank had worked construction for 31 years. He'd been a foreman for the last 12. He worked in the cold and the heat, and he never once complained about it in front of me. And all that time, quietly, without making a production of it, he'd been building this. I did cry then in the car. Not sad tears. The kind that come from finally understanding something you should have known for years. The house sold in 9 days. $592,000, cash, to a young couple. He was a doctor finishing his residency at Health Sciences North. She was a physiotherapist. They had a 1-year-old daughter and a golden retriever. When we signed the papers at the lawyer's office on May 3rd, the wife told me she'd grown up 2 streets over and had always loved this house. We're going to put a real garden in, she said. Frank planted roses on his first summer here, I told her. There are 4 established bushes along the back fence. They bloomed the last week of June. She teared up. I handed her Frank's note on the maintenance schedule for the roses, the one he'd kept in a folder in the garage. I'd made a copy for myself. After the closing, I drove to my sister's house and sat at her kitchen table and cried again. She made tea and didn't try to fix anything, which is why she's been my closest person for 61 years. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," I said. "Also something else. I don't have a word for it yet." She squeezed my hand across the table. "Go find one." My son-in-law had moved out by the end of April. He'd gone quietly, without confrontation, which I appreciated. Sylvie and I didn't speak for 11 days. Then she showed up at my sister's place. I'd been staying there since the house went under contract, with her eyes red and a grocery bag of things she'd thought I might want to take. A photograph of Frank and me on our first camping trip. A small pottery dish she'd made me in grade 7 art class, glazed blue, that I kept my rings in. She sat at my sister's kitchen table and said nothing for a long time. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she finally said. "I know," I said. "I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I think I thought of you as someone who needed looking after. I don't know when that happened. You never needed looking after." "I needed to be seen," I said. "There's a difference." She looked at the grocery bag and then at me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I think I was so focused on what we wanted that I stopped thinking about what you were." "What was I?" "A person," she said. "Just a person with her own whole life." She cried then, and I held her, and I thought, this is what repair looks like when someone is actually willing to do the work. It isn't fast, it isn't resolved in one conversation, but it's real. I landed in Faro on May 11th at noon. The air hit me coming off the jet bridge, warm, dry, carrying something faintly of salt and eucalyptus, and I stood there for a full 10 seconds, just breathing it. The woman from Halifax was waiting for me outside arrivals. She was exactly what she'd seemed in our video calls. Practical, warm, completely unimpressed by anything that didn't deserve it. She drove me to Lagos in her 10-year-old Renault, windows down, talking constantly about everything I'd need to know. All of it useful, none of it alarming. The cottage was on a hillside lane behind the old town. White walls and terracotta roof and a wooden door painted blue the color of a Canadian lake in August. Inside, cool stone floors, deep-set windows, a kitchen that smelled of orange peel and old wood, and the terrace facing west, looking out over the Atlantic. I stood there and said nothing for a very long time. "There it is," the woman from Halifax said. "There it is," I agreed. The first month was humbling in ways I hadn't expected. My Portuguese was limited to obrigada, which I deployed constantly and probably incorrectly. I burned my first attempt at buying fish at the market because I couldn't negotiate the oven's Celsius markings, though I'm a nurse and have known Celsius my whole life, and I blame jet lag. My neighbor, an elderly woman who grew up in the village and had opinions about everything including my parking, seemed at first to want nothing to do with me, and then one afternoon left a dish of pastéis de nata at my door with a handwritten note in Portuguese that I had translated to mean approximately, "From my kitchen, welcome." I cried about that too. I was doing a lot of crying, the good kind. I found a yoga class in English, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, in a small studio near the market square. The instructor was Irish. The students were from 8 countries. After the 3rd week, 5 of us went for coffee afterward and didn't leave the cafe for 2 hours. I started volunteering 2 afternoons a week at a small medical clinic that served expats and tourists. A Canadian doctor ran it, and when she heard I had 31 years in cardiac nursing, she looked at me like I was water in a desert. I wasn't practicing formally, just helping with triage and intake, but it turned out I needed to be useful more than I'd realized. Nursing hadn't just been a job. It had been a way of knowing who I was, Finding a smaller version of it here felt like coming home to something I didn't know I'd left. Sylvie video called in July. She was living with a friend in the short term while they figured out their housing situation. She looked, I thought, like someone who'd been through something and was starting to come out the other side. She asked about the cottage, about Portugal. She asked about the roses, whether I'd found anything like them there. I told her about the bougainvillea that crawled up the wall below the terrace. She asked if she could visit in October. One condition, I told her. She'd come alone. And she'd come ready to meet me. Not her mother, not the woman who was supposed to need looking after. Me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm in therapy. Twice a week. I want you to know that." "Good," I said. She says I have some things to work through about control, about needing people to fit into a shape I could manage. "I know," I said. "I got that from you, actually," she said. "The therapist says it often comes from a parent. I'm not saying that as an accusation." I laughed, first time in a while. "I raised you to handle things. I just didn't factor in what would happen if I became one of the things." She laughed too, and it sounded like her real laugh, the one from before everything got complicated. October, she came. She arrived with one bag and a box of Timbits from Pearson that she'd somehow transported intact, which I told her was either impressive logistics or proof she's still the stubborn child who refused to lose at anything. She put them on the terrace table, and we sat there in the October sun. Warm enough still for shirt sleeves in the afternoon, eating Timbits and looking at the Atlantic, and not talking for a long time. "Dad would have loved this," she said finally. "He would have been insufferable about it," I said. "He'd have known the name of every boat in the harbor by the second day." She smiled. "He would have learned Portuguese in a week." 2 weeks, I said. "He had an accent in French until the end." She looked at me sideways. "Are you happy, Mom?" I thought about it, the way the question deserved. "I am," I said. "I'm also lonely sometimes, and my Portuguese is still embarrassing. And I burned a fish last month in a way that I think genuinely offended my neighbor. But when I wake up in the morning and I go out to the terrace and I have my coffee and I watch the light change over the water, I feel like someone finally asked me what I wanted and waited for the answer." Sylvie was quiet. "I want to know that person," she said. "I want to know you, not as my mother, as you." I reached over and took her hand. "You're a good start," I said. 8 months in, I have done the following. I reached conversational Portuguese in tourist situations, which is less impressive than it sounds, but more than I expected. I have walked the Ponte de Piedade path 17 times, and it does not get less beautiful. I bought my cottage in September. The owners were ready to sell, and my financial advisor confirmed it was a reasonable investment for €280,000. I now own it outright. My liquid assets, conservatively managed, produce roughly $105,000 Canadian annually between the RRSP drawdown, rental income from the remaining account, and investment returns. I live on perhaps $70,000 a year here, comfortably. I save the rest. My friend from Halifax and I have started a small informal group, Canadian women over 60, living in or visiting the Algarve, meeting twice a month at a restaurant near the marina. There are 9 of us now. We don't have a name. Someone suggested one evening that we call ourselves the Later Bloomers, and it stuck. Sylvie is coming back in the spring. She and her husband are working on things. I don't know if they'll make it, and it's not mine to manage. What I know is that she calls twice a week now, real calls, not check-ins. She asks questions. She listens to the answers. She's learning who I am, and I am relearning who she is. And we are building something smaller and more honest than what we had before, which might turn out to be stronger. I kept Frank's table. It's in the cottage now, in the kitchen corner near the window that faces the orange tree in the courtyard. I have my coffee there every morning. I think he would have liked knowing it ended up somewhere. The light is good. I have started writing things down, not for any particular reason, just to remember. On the morning of March 4th, 2024, my daughter told me I was becoming a burden. I said I'd think about it, and I did. And what I thought was this: I have spent 63 years being someone for other people. I have been a daughter and a wife and a nurse and a mother and a widow and a woman who clips coupons and worries about hot water heaters. I have been useful and accommodating, and I have never once, not once, asked what I actually wanted. So I asked, and what I wanted was this: a stone cottage on a hillside in Portugal with a terrace over the Atlantic, a door painted lakewater blue, a neighbor who leaves pastries on my step, a group of women who laugh too loud at dinner, and mornings so quiet and so mine that they feel like something I invented. My daughter told me to find a smaller place, something more manageable. People my own age. I found something better. I found myself,